Selain itu, Rusia dilaporkan telah melancarkan serangan besar-besaran menggunakan drone dan peluru berpandu.
War in Europe. Putin sends his troops into Ukraine.
War is not the solution.
Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Syafiah and I will be moderating today's forum. Our discussion today centers on a question that has sparked intense debate among scholars and policymakers. Is international law still useful and practical in resolving the Russia against Ukraine war? Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the international legal system has been tested in ways we have not seen since the Second World War. Core principles such as state sovereignty, the prohibition on the use of force, and the protection of civilians have all been placed under enormous pressure. On one side, international law clearly condemns Russia's actions as illegal under the UN Charter. International court have issued ruling, arrest warrants, and legal findings that shape how the world responds to this conflict. On the other side, enforcement failures, geopolitical interests, and the veto power in the UN Security Council raise serious doubt about whether international law can do more than simply condemn violation. So today, we will explore both the usefulness and the limitation of international law in this war. To begin, let us look at whether international law still matters at all in an active conflict. I will invite Ms. EDLIN to start us off.
Thank you, Sophia. When people look at Russia and Ukraine war, it's very easy to say that international law has failed, simply because the fighting has not yet stopped. But that view assumes that only the purpose of international law is to end wars immediately. International law remains highly useful because it provides clarity and structure. It tells us what is lawful and what is not. Under the UN Charter, Russia's use of force against Ukraine is clearly illegal, and that clarity matters. Because international law sets these standards, the international community is able to justify sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and collective condemnation. Without this legal framework, responses to the war would be based purely on politics rather than shared legal principles. International law is still functioning through legal institutions. Ukraine has brought cases before the International Court of Justice, and that the ICJ has issued provisional measures ordering Russia to suspend its military operations. Even if Russia does not comply, this ruling preserves evidence, record violations, and strengthens Ukraine's position for future accountability. While international law may not stop tanks on the ground, it continues to shape how the war is judged, remembered, and responded to globally. But usefulness alone does not mean effectiveness. And that brings us to the next part of the discussion. I will pass to Farisha for the next discussion.
Thank you, EDLIN. So, if international law clearly identifies wrongdoing, the next question becomes, why does it struggle to stop those violations in practice? This leads us directly to the key issues and challenges limiting the effectiveness of international law. One of the most serious challenges is enforcement. The United Nations Security Council is supposed to maintain international peace and security. However, in this conflict, Russia's veto power has effectively paralyzed the councils. Even when violations are obvious, legally binding action cannot be taken if a permanent member blocks it. Another major issue is geopolitical power. Powerful states often prioritize strategic interests over legal obligations. This results in selective enforcement, where international law appears strong on paper but weak when applied to influential states. Russia has also actively manipulated legal language to justify its inventions. It has relied on claims of self-defense, collective self-defense, and humanitarian interventions. However, these arguments do not meet the established requirement under international law. Preventive self-defense is not recognized under the UN Charter. The Donetsk and Luhansk regions are not sovereign states capable of requesting collective self-defense, and humanitarian intervention requires UN Security Council authorization, which was never granted. This manipulation of legal agreement creates confusions, delay accountability, and weaken trust in international law. At this point, we can see that the problem is not whether international law exists, but whether it can operate effectively when powerful states are not involved. To explore this deeper tension between legal norms and political reality, I will now pass the discussion to Sheila. But the Russia-Ukraine war clearly reveals its stark dichotomy in the role of international law. On one hand, international law remains highly useful, particularly for normative purpose and long-term accountability. It provides the essential legal framework needed to classify Russia action as illegal under the UN Charter. This classification is crucial because it prevents aggression from being normalized and enable the global community to respond in an illegal, grounded way. Through international law, states are able to diplomatically isolate Russia, justify stringent economic sanctions, and rely on mechanisms such as the Criminal Court to pursue criminal accountability and future reparations claim. In this sense, international law remains indispensable. It defines wrongdoing, preserves responsibility, and lays the groundwork for justice beyond the battlefield. However, at the same time, international law is practically constrained when it comes to immediately resolving the conflict. The most significant limitation is the enforcement deficit within the United Nations Security Council. Because Russia is a permanent member of the UNSC, it can use its veto power to block any binding collective security action. This structural weakness highlights the dominance of a realpolitik in the short term, where political power overrides legal obligation. As a result, international law cannot physically halt the war on its own. It depends heavily on the sustained political will, cooperation, and enforcement by states. So, international law is not obsolete. Rather, it serves as the enduring conscience of the international system. It defines the illegality of the conflict, guide the global system, guide the global response, and preserve the possibility of accountability, even though it cannot substitute for the political action required to stop aggression in real time.
Thank you, Syafiah. Our findings highlight three main areas. First, Russia's actions are driven by geopolitical strategies aimed at maintaining influence over Ukraine. These include military forces, economic pressure, energy diplomacy, and information warfare. Together, these strategies weaken the effectiveness of international legal norms. Second, the war has caused serious global consequences, particularly for the tourism sector. Ukraine's tourism infrastructure has been destroyed, or air routes disrupted, and travel confidence has been reduced worldwide. Sanction and refugee movement have further strained tourism economies, leading them to financial losses and uncertainty. Third, our findings confirm that Russia's legal justification are invalid. Under international law, claims of preventive self-defense, collective self-defense, and humanitarian intervention do not meet the legal requirements of the UN Charter or international humanitarian law. These findings show that international law still provides clarity and judgment, but its practical impact still remains limited when enforcement is weak. This brings us naturally to our final reflections.
Thank you, Ms. Farah. From the findings, while international law provides clarity and accountability, it struggles to bring an immediate end to the conflict. This brings us to the most important question moving forward. If international law alone cannot stop the war, how can it still contribute to peace? We will now look at the possible solution, focusing on how international law can support conflict resolution through peace treaty and diplomacy. I will begin by discussing the role of peace treaties, followed by Ms. Farah, who will explore the role of diplomacy. One key solution where international law remains highly relevant is by a peace treaty. Although international law may struggle to stop active hostilities, it's become especially powerful in the post-conflict phase. A peace treaty provides a legally binding framework to formally end hostilities, restore territorial integrity, and set clear obligations for both parties. International law guides the content of peace treaties by embedding principles such as respect for sovereignty, non-aggression, accountability for violations, and protection of human rights. In the context of the Russia and Ukraine war, a peace treaty grounded in international law could address issues such as withdrawal of forces, repression, reconstruction, and guarantee against future aggression. Importantly, international law ensures that peace is not achieved at the expense of justice. War crimes against humanity, and violation of international humanitarian law cannot simply be ignored in the name of peace. Legal mechanisms such as international criminal court remain relevant even after a peace agreement is reached. Therefore, while a peace treaty requires political negotiation, international law provides the structure, legitimacy, and legal certainty needed to transform a ceasefire into a durable and just peace. This naturally leads to the role of diplomacy, which is essential in making any peace treaty possible.
Thank you, Sophia. Diplomacy plays a crucial role in bridging the gap between international law and real-world political action. While courts and legal rules establish what is lawful, diplomatic engagement is often what turns legal principle into practical outcomes. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, diplomacy, both bilateral and multilateral, remains essential for de-escalation and long-term stability. International law supports diplomacy by providing common rules and language for negotiation. Forums such as the United Nations, regional organization, and neutral third-party mediators rely heavily on international legal norms to guide dialogue, propose ceasefires, and frame negotiation terms. Diplomacy also helps overcome enforcement weaknesses. When legal mechanisms cannot compel compliance, diplomatic pressure, coalition building, and sustained negotiation can encourage states to change behavior. Sanctions, peace talks, and confidence building measures all rely heavily on diplomatic coordination. In addition, diplomacy is vital for addressing humanitarian concern, prisoner exchange, refugee protection, and reconstruction efforts. These areas shows us how international law and diplomacy work together rather than in isolation. Ultimately, diplomacy does not replace international law. Instead, it acts as a vehicle through which the international law is applied, negotiated, and gradually enforced in a complex geopolitical environment.
Thank you, Ms. Farah. We have now explored the usefulness, limitation, findings, and possible solution. To conclude our forum and tie everything together, I will now invite Ms. EDLIN to deliver the final conclusion.
Thank you. In conclusion, the Russia and Ukraine war does not show that international law is irrelevant. It reveals both its importance and its weakness. International law may not be able to immediately stop armed aggression by powerful states, but it plays an essential role in defining illegality, shaping global responses, and preserving the possibility of justice. It ensures that the aggression is condemned rather than accepted, that accountability remains possible even if it delays. At the same time, the conflict highlights the urgent need to reform, especially in addressing veto power and strengthening enforcement mechanisms. Ultimately, international law remains the foundation of global order. It may be constrained, but is still indispensable in the search for a just and lasting resolution to the Russia-Ukraine war. Thank you.